It was the festival of Passover. Jesus and his 12 disciples had gathered in a room for their last supper together. Jesus knew it would be their final time to be together before he died. So he told his friends many important things. There was one very important message he had for them. One of the disciples would betray him. "The one who betrays me will dip his food in the bowl at the same time I do," said Jesus. And just as he said that, Judas reached over and dipped his food in the bowl. With shock and anger, Judas looked at Jesus. The Son of God knew beforehand that Judas would betray him and deliver him over to the chief priests and religious leaders. Judas shoved away from the table and scrambled for the door in a rush. He didn't look back. He scurried away to do his evil deed. All the other disciples looked on in awe. They could not believe that one of their own was a traitor. Jesus understood that the hour was soon approaching, that he would suffer and die for the sin of all mankind. He told the disciples to remember his death and to think of him often. He took the cup and bread, gave thanks for it, broke it, and handed it to each of them. He told them to think of the wine as his blood and the bread as his body. The disciples did not understand what Jesus was saying. Peter, one of the disciples, said that he would never leave Jesus. But Jesus quickly told Peter that before that night was over, Peter would deny that he knew him 3 times. Meanwhile, with the chief priests, Judas carried out his evil deed. He agreed to hand Jesus over to the cruel leaders if they would pay him a lot of money. Of course, Judas knew it was wrong, but there was no turning back now. By now it was dark outside. Jesus and his disciples went to a garden. Jesus wanted to prepare for his death, so he fell to his knees, bowed his head, and poured out his heart to his heavenly Father. "Oh God," he cried, "I don't want to suffer, but I will do what you want me to." His prayer went on for hours. The disciples couldn't stay awake and fell asleep nearby. Jesus, however, couldn't sleep and stayed awake in prayer. When Jesus came to his disciples, he found them asleep. Even after he woke them and encouraged them to pray, they fell asleep again. The second time, Jesus woke them and told them that the time had come for him to be arrested. The disciples were confused and did not know what to expect. A group of armed guards rushed up to Jesus and his disciples. Judas was with them. Judas walked over and kissed Jesus on the cheek, a sign to the soldiers that Jesus was the one they should arrest. Peter wasn't about to let this happen. He was going to protect Jesus. He whipped out his own sword and slashed at the guards. In doing so, he chopped off the ear of one of the servants. Jesus rebuked Peter gently. Jesus knew that Peter meant well, but this was all part of God's plan. Jesus touched the man's ear and completely healed it. The guards were amazed. "Have you come with swords and clubs to arrest me like a robber?" Jesus asked, looking up at his attackers. The guards knew that Jesus had been preaching and teaching in public places, and no one ever tried to arrest him there. This night was different. The disciples were afraid and ran away, but Peter followed Jesus at a distance. Jesus was led all the way from the Garden of Gethsemane through the Kidron Valley to the high priest. There he was interrogated. They were trying to find a reason to kill him. Of course, Jesus was honest and true. He simply told them what he had always declared. He was the Son of God. This enraged the leaders. They led him to another court to obtain permission to put him to death. Meanwhile, Peter stood outside in the courtyard around a fire with other bystanders. He wanted to see what happened. "You're his disciple, aren't you?" a servant girl suddenly asked him. "No, I'm not," Peter swore and became angry. "I don't even know him." 3 times it happened. that Peter was asked if he knew Jesus, and 3 times he lied. Then suddenly, the 3rd time he lied, a rooster crowed 3 times, and Peter remembered what Jesus had said. He ran away, feeling horrible, weeping bitterly. That night, after Jesus was arrested, Judas realized what he had done. He was so overcome with guilt. He didn't care about the money that he had earned. He ran to the priests and threw the coins on the floor. Then he ran out, tied a rope around his neck, and hung himself. That same night, Jesus was on trial before the Roman leader, Pilate. Even Pilate didn't want to kill Jesus. "He hasn't done anything to deserve death," Pilate said, exasperated. The crowds, whipped into a frenzy by the leaders, just wanted to see some blood. "Crucify him!" they chanted with maddening anger. Pilate decided to give in. "I'm going to give you what you want, just to keep the peace. But I have nothing to do with this. I wash my hands of it." The cruel Roman soldiers were only too glad to oblige. Jesus was whipped mercilessly, leaving him bleeding and wounded. They mocked Jesus, hailing him as a king. Then they shoved a crown of thorns on his head. They spit at him, hit him, slapped him, and made cruel jokes. Jesus, silently suffering, did not retaliate. He was like a lamb being sacrificed. He was indeed the sacrifice, dying for the sins of the very people who tortured him. The time had come. Jesus would be nailed to a cross. He was forced to carry his own heavy cross until he fell from the pain and exhaustion. Jesus was so weak that a man named Simon of Cyrene ended up carrying his cross to the top of Golgotha. There, at the hill called Golgotha, which means Hill of the Skull, Jesus was crucified like a criminal. Hanging on the cross for all to see, 2 thieves hung beside him. This was no place for the Son of God. Jesus' hands and feet were nailed into the cross. The soldiers hoisted the cross into the air, and Pilate hung a sign above his head that read, "Here hangs Jesus, the King of the Jews." The religious leaders were furious about this, but Pilate refused to remove the sign. As Jesus hung dying on the cross, the entire land was plunged into darkness, even though it was the middle of the day. Then, before Jesus died, he cried out with his last breath, "It is finished!" Jesus breathed no more. A low rumbling erupted from all around. In Jerusalem's holy temple, the mighty curtain that separated the holiest of holies was torn in half. Many knew that instant that Jesus was truly the Son of God. Before evening, right before the Sabbath started, Joseph of Arimathea asked Pilate for Jesus' body. He prepared it for burial and placed Jesus' body in his own new tomb. He then rolled a large stone in front of the entrance. Guards were stationed outside the tomb to make sure that no one came to steal Jesus' body. The religious council knew Jesus said he would rise again. They wanted to prevent that. Jesus had to die to appease God's wrath towards sin. But this was not the end. Jesus would be resurrected after 3 days to defeat death and sin forever.